In this video, I'm going to show you how to quickly look at any real estate rental deal and decide if this is something that's worth pursuing. I'm going to do this by showing you kind of back of the envelope calculation. What's back of the envelope calculations? It's mean that quick calculation that you can do without having to look at a spreadsheet, without having to have an app, all of that. Something that you can literally take a little piece of paper and look at a couple of numbers together to figure out if this makes sense. We're going to look at some income snapshots. So we're going to look at gross rental yield, also known as kind of like the 1% rule. We're going to look at cap rate, cash on cash return, how to do the net cash flow and net operating income. We're also going to look at some equity metrics as well around appreciation, around mortgage pay down, also around value add, and see how you can quickly assess how you would build equity with certain properties. And this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to put it all together at the end in a step-by-step process on how you can quickly go down the list of properties and kind of filter them out relatively quickly. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. One of them is a turnkey rental property from Martel Turnkey. And then I'm also going to show you some turnkey rental flips that you can do as well. And we're going to quickly go through these same numbers, that same process that you can see how I calculate, do these back of the envelope calculation on these rental property. My name is Eric Martel. I'm the co-founder of Martel Turnkey, which is a turnkey single family rental provider. I'm also co-founder of Flip System, which is a real estate investment program to help you invest in real estate. We have online training, coaching, as well as teams on the ground to help you invest with minimum risk and with maximum success. Well, if you're ready to go, let's do it. All right, in this video, I'm going to show you how to do a back of the envelope analysis. I use that very frequently when I'm analyzing deals, when I'm talking to other investors, and I want to kind of like, be able to have a discussion without having a spreadsheet or some application that I have to deal with. The other advantage of why back of the envelope analysis is important is that it's going to give you a gut check of kind of like, is this opportunity, is this deal worth pursuing, right? So before going into and creating a spreadsheet and putting all your numbers in, or going into your application and loading all the numbers and making sure everything is okay, you have a little bit of a gut check. You're looking on Redfin and Zillow, and you're able to quickly assess, do I need to look more into this or not? The other thing too that's pretty important is the clarity, right? So sometimes you get presented with, fancy, flashy presentations or videos about deals, and it looks very, very good. And sometimes it's because they don't focus on some of the numbers that are important to evaluate the deal, but instead are talking about other factors that are very important. And it looks great, it looks fine, but with this back of the envelope analysis, you're going to get some clarity and some alignment with your goals. So that way, when you look at these fancy presentations, you can quickly jot down some numbers that are important and then figure out on your own if this is something that you want to pursue or not. And finally, the other thing is it's going to give you a deeper understanding of the numbers. Often we get some spreadsheets from some investors or some deals from some investors. And, we kind of look at it and we say, well, there's something odd about it. There's something that doesn't kind of jive in. And that's because when you do the back of the envelope analysis, you get a better appreciation and a deeper understanding of what is happening with the numbers. You have a sense of the relationship between the different numbers, and you have this kind of like, again, kind of like going back to the gut check, you have a gut feeling that there's something odd going on, or there's something you need to get into a little bit further. So these are the advantages of the back of the envelope analysis, and I'm going to get right into it. So I use these back of the envelope analysis when I buy rental property. I focus on rental property. If you follow my channel, if you subscribe to my channel, you know that I'm all about financial independence. This is something that's very important to me, and you do that by building passive income. So one of the things that I want, when I'm analyzing deal, I'm focused on that. Is this deal is going to create passive income? and how much passive income. I'm also working on building wealth, obviously. I want these properties to appreciate and be worth more and have more equity and build some equity. When we're talking also about financial independence and building passive income, a lot of people, they just want to build that passive income portfolio so they can retire. But some people are not really thinking about retirement. For me, I'm thinking more about a work optional lifestyle, where I can work on things. I work on projects, I work on my business and different businesses that I have. And this is what I like to do. A lot of people are asking me, when are you going to retire? And to me, this is not something that at this point, I don't want to just, stop working. I really enjoy working. I think it's something that's great, but I have lots of flexibility about my work and what I do. So this is something that's important for most people, young and old, is that work optional lifestyle. And finally, you want to be leaving a legacy for your children, right? For your descendant. Imagine a lot of people that are working 9 to 5, they spend their entire lives, 20, 30 years, building a career, getting promoted to have more responsibility and make a lot of money. You spend all this time building a career, and that career, you cannot pass it on to your children. They're stuck. You can't pass on your job as a CEO or a CFO of a company to your children. It doesn't work like that. But this is something that you can do with real estate rentals. You can pass that on to your children in terms of a portfolio, and they can really leverage that for the rest of their lives. So you're really setting your children very well for the future. Now, the two things that are working with rentals, so when you want to achieve these goals here, the first one is going to be around income. So we're going to look at income. This is going to be the first one that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to look at some key calculations that I do when I'm evaluating a deal. And the other one is going to be around equity. So equity, obviously, very important because that's where it's going to affect our wealth. And and also being able to kind of leverage and build and accelerate your passive income, as you leverage that equity to buy more passive income property. So let's look at some income metrics. The first one I'm going to look at is the gross rental yield, GRY. We're going to look at the cap rate, the net cash flow, and the cash on cash return. So these are the metrics that I normally look at and I calculate in order to quickly evaluate if the income potential of a rental property is something that I want to look into. So the gross rental yield is the monthly rent divided by the total price of the property. The total price of the property here means not just necessarily the purchase price, but sometimes you also have other costs associated with that. Sometimes you have closing costs, right? Or sometimes you also have to do additional rehabs or renovations in order for you to rent this property. So these would all be factored into that total price here. The monthly rent would be the monthly gross rent, and you multiply by 100. This is your gross yield. The higher this gross yield is, the better it is. So let's say we have a property and the rent per month is $1,000. And then the total price of the property is $144,000, right? Then we'll multiply that by 100. The yield, the gross yield on that property is 0.736%, right? So this is one property. I can look at another property. Maybe the rent is $1,250, but the price of the property is $300,000, right? And multiply by 100. And in this case, the gross rental yield is 0.406. Obviously, you don't need to go to too many decimal places, but this one is basically 0.7 and this one is 0.4. So the higher, when you look at these values, this one would be a preferred property. The higher this value, the better it is. The higher, the better. Okay, so this is when I'm looking at these metrics, I always want to have the higher values to represent something that's better for me. I know there are some other metrics out there and they kind of go in the opposite direction. So I like to keep all my metrics to be in the same direction. The higher, always the better. This is also something with that gross rental yield also is something that you've heard maybe in the past, is the 1% rule. And the 1% rule is basically a property where, let's say, the rent is $1,200 and the property is $120,000. So this is the 1% rule here, and this would give you a 1% gross rental yield. Anything higher than that, around that range, technically is pretty good for cash flow. So this is something that if you find a gross rental yield around the 1% rule, there's a pretty good potential that you want to look deeper into that. Next, I want to talk about the cap rate, right? But before I go into that, I want to explain something, which is the net operating income. The net operating income, I call it NOI here, is basically your gross rent minus your operating expenses. That means property taxes, that means property management fee, that means insurance, that could mean utilities if you're paying it as a landlord. There could be some regular maintenance like grass and stuff like that if you're paying for it as a landlord on a regular basis. So these would be your operating expenses. It does not include the mortgage payment. So the net operating income is the gross rent minus the operating expenses, excluding the financing costs or the mortgage. So that's the net operating income. Now the cap rate is the annual net operating income divided by the total price. The same way that we defined the total price before, it is the purchase price, maybe closing costs, and maybe additional costs associated with acquiring the property and getting it to produce revenue. So the cap rate here is calculated that way. So let's say we have one property that is the net operating income, the annual net operating income is $10,000, and we are paying $100,000 for this property. And that's 10% cap rate, okay? And then we're comparing that with a second property where basically the net operating is half of that, but it's the same price. Right? So that's 5% property, 5% cap rate. So obviously, which one is the better property, which one is producing the most, is obviously this property. Again, the higher, the better. This is pretty good in order to compare properties without considering how you're going to finance it. So just looking at what is the property itself producing. If you were to pay cash for this property, what is the ROI of the property itself? So this is the first meaning of this cap rate, is the ROI of the property itself. Right? If you pay cash for it. The other thing too that it indicates when you're looking at the cap rate and you're comparing cap rate, some cap rates are going to be higher than others, obviously, and this is often represents something about the risk reward. So you have to think that if this property has a higher cap rate, it's probably in an area that is not as favorable as a property that is a lower cap rate area. Right? So if you're in downtown in a major city, the cap rate is going to tend to be a lot lower than a property that's in the neighborhood, not in the neighborhoods, but in the suburb that is far away from the downtown core. Then you would tend to have a higher cap rate in those areas. just because it's further away, it's not as convenient for people to live there, so you're gonna have a higher cap rate. So typically it's a measure of the risk reward. Sometimes it could also be in a bad area, a bad neighborhood, compared to a nicer neighborhood. You would see a difference in cap rate that way. The other thing too that's important about the cap rate is this something that could also help you compare other investment types that don't have the financing components. So if I'm looking, for example, at a bond that you can buy, and if I can get 3% on a corporate bond or a government bond, how does that compare to other investments that I have? If I can get 3% here bond with no risk, then I can get, or I can get 5% here with this property by investing some money, etc. Then, I can compare these types of investment against one another because none of those are including the financing aspect of the property. Now, let's talk about the net cash flow. Part of the reason why we're doing these investments is that we want to build some passive income, right? Passive income is basically going to come from this net cash flow. This is what we want. This is what we're looking for when we're trying to build a passive income portfolio. Literally, the net cash flow is the net operating income, what we had discussed previously, minus the cost of financing the property. So if I buy, as an example here, if I buy a property and the net cash flow from the net operating income from the property is $1,200 and my mortgage payment is $800, then my net cash flow is $400. Okay, so this is very simple. You're just taking your mortgage payment in here, and this is going to give you, when you take your net operating income minus that, is going to give you your net cash flow. So this is what you can count on to go and hit the bank eventually. So this is where the net cash flow is coming from. Once we have the net cash flow, the other measure that I'd like to know is what is the cash on cash return. Knowing that I'm going to make $400 in cash flow per month is nice, but it kind of, if I'm going to compare different properties, if I'm going to say this property I make $400 in net cash flow, and this other property I'm going to make $600 in net cash flow, it doesn't mean that the property that's making $600 in net cash flow is a better investment than the one that does $400 in net cash flow per month, right? I think the thing that is important to note is how much cash did I have to invest in order to get this net cash flow. And this is what the cash on cash return actually measures. So if for example, I have a net cash flow of the $400 times 12, so that's going to be $4,800 a year. So this is the annual cash flow. And in order to get this, I had to put down $50,000. So this is the cash that I had invested. The cash that I had invested is the down payment, any kind of closing costs that I have to do, and if I had to do any kind of renovations, clean up, or turn down in order to make this property produce that $4,800 in net cash flow, then this would be the cash that I have invested in the property. So when you look at that, that gives you about 10% cash on cash return. So one thing that you want to notice here is that it's also obviously dependent on the amount of financing. How much did you get in terms of financing, right? So this is something, there's a kind of like a sweet spot here that you have to figure out, because if you increase the financing, if you put more leverage, a higher mortgage, it's going to reduce this down payment, right? So that down payment is going to go down. So that means that cash invested is going to go down. But it's going to also increase leverage, increase the mortgage, the loan, right? Which means it's going to increase the financing costs, which means that it's also going to reduce the net cash flow, right? So that's what's going to happen. And then this ratio might change depending on the amount of financing that you're getting and stuff. So this is something that you want to look at and kind of and calculate depending on the level of financing, and then figure out what is the best cash on cash return that you can find. All right, now we've talked about the 4 key metrics associated with income. And now we're going to talk about equity. Equity is very important in order to build wealth. And so this is what we're going to talk about here. So equity is really the value of the property that you have minus what you owe. It's simple as that, right? So a lot of people are complicating things with, when you talk about balance sheet and assets and liabilities. Yes, this is all true, but in effect, equity is the value of the property minus what you owe. It's as simple as that. And there are really 4 ways to build that equity. The first way is buy the property at a discount. So that means that I know I'm going to buy a property where the purchase price, let's say, is $100,000, but I know that when I'm going to go and I'm going to get a loan for $80,000, but I know that the value of the property, because I did an appraisal or whatever, the value of the property is $120,000. So that means that even though I'm in this situation here, I bought the property at $100,000 in purchase price, and then I owe $80,000 because of the loan. That's my down payment basically on the equity. So initially my equity is $20,000, but I know this is where it differs a little bit from the accounting principle, unless you revalue your properties. But here I know that the value of this property, because it appraised, is now worth $120,000. I still have an $80,000 loan. So that means that now my equity is $40,000 because I have this delta in the value because I bought this property at a discount. The second way to do this is to do value add. So to add value to the property. So that means doing some renovations to basically increase the value of the property. This is also something that's called forced appreciation. So if I go to my initial thing here where I have $100,000, so let's say I borrow here, so I have my, let me just rewrite it here, is equal to 100 minus 80. So let's say I borrow $10,000 and I'm going to do some repairs on the property. Right? I'm going to do some repairs, $10,000 renovation, renovation, and that is going to increase the value, let's say, by $20,000. This is a kitchen, blah, blah, remodel, and now I can sell this property. The property is now valued at $120 because I did this renovation. Maybe I can do plus 20. So that means that now this value is $120. And this loan now is minus 90. I owe my original $80,000 and I have an additional loan of $10,000. And that means that I've increased now my equity to $30,000 because of the renovations that I have done. Obviously, this number is here, but this is the basic concepts behind flipping properties. You buy properties very dilapidated that requires a lot of renovations, and then you're able to increase the value, get a loan, and then you build equity that way very, very quickly. All right, the third way to build equity is the mortgage pay down. So now you initially start with an $80,000 mortgage, right? This mortgage right here. And you have a tenant in place, and that tenant is paying your gross rent, and he pays all the expenses, and there's money left over to pay your mortgage and your net cash flow as well. So basically the tenant is continuing to pay, your principal is paying down your mortgage. And this is basically what happens. You're making your payment. Let's say you have an $80,000 mortgage at 8% and the payment is $587, every month and over 30 years. At the beginning, the amount that you owe is going down slowly, right? And the reason for this is that when you look at your first payment, right, you're going to pay a lot more in interest because the interest is going to be calculated as 8% divided by 12 times the $80,000. The interest amount is going to be $586.67. Your payment every month is $587. So the first payment that you're paying towards the mortgage, it's only paying 33 cents towards the principal. So now you're going to owe $79,999.67. So it's going to be a very small amount. This is why at the beginning it's almost flat. But as you pay down the mortgage, what happens is that this accelerates. So it has a compounding effect. So if I look at the point where further down the line here, where I pay down about half of the mortgage. So I'm done at $40,000 in principal left to pay on the mortgage. My interest payment is $266.67 that month. That means I'm paying 8% divided by 12 times $40,000. So $266.67. I'm still doing my same payment, the $587. So that means that I'm now, instead of paying 33 cents for the first payment, I'm now paying $320 for that payment here. But of course, it takes a while to get there. And it takes more. You can see here, it takes more than 15 years to get there. It actually takes 22 and a half years to get to that point. 22 and a half years to pay half of this mortgage. So this is what happens is that when we look at this equation here, now let's assume there's no appreciation. Let's forget about appreciation for now. Let's say the value is exactly the same for that property, but now I owe only $40,000 for that property. Now my equity is now $60,000 for that property. That means that later on, as I pay down the mortgage, this is something that I can leverage. I can go and refinance the property and then extract $60,000 off of that property, and then get more money out of the property so that I can buy more passive income property and accelerate my cash flow. All right, so this is the mortgage paydown, how the mortgage paydown helps you increase equity. Now the fourth way that you can increase equity is with appreciation. So with appreciation, it works kind of the opposite. It's also compounded, right? So one thing that is important to note is that the appreciation applies to the total value of the property, not just the cash invested. This is why leverage is so important. Even though I have $20,000 in equity here, if I have an appreciation of 3%, it's not the $20,000 that's appreciating, it's the value of the asset. So it's 3% of $100,000. And the other thing too is that this appreciates every year. So basically at the beginning of the first year, the property is worth $100,000. And after 1 year, you have 3% appreciation. So you add $3,000 in the value of the property, and now it's worth $103,000. Right? The next year, so that same $1,000 also increase in value. So you have another $3,000 appreciation for that. But you also, this is the compounding effect, is that you also are appreciating this additional $3,000 here. So that's a $900 extra in appreciation. And that means that now you're at 106,900. Right? And you continue like that and you say, well, you know, there's that $100,000 that I had initially plus that $6,900. So that means that here I'm going to appreciate an extra $3,000 and then I'm going to appreciate another $2,100 off this $6,900, right? And that means that I'm adding now $5,000 on top of that. So this means that 1,200, right? So you can check my numbers, but something along those lines. So you can see that this is compounding very rapidly. The first year I'm only increasing in value $3,000. Next year is, you know, an extra $3,900, and the next year is $5,000. So it's increasing. And this is why you end up having a geometric curve here, because it keeps accelerating and compounding every year. Now, let's look at something important. We talked in the previous slide about the mortgage pay down at year 22 and a half. So what is the value of the property after 22 and a half years here? So at that point, the value of the property would be 194,500. Okay, so that's where it will be. But we also know that at year 22 and a half, the value that we owe is going to be $40,000, right? So at 22 and a half, you can see that the equity that we have in this property is 154. I'm just going to leave it at 154. 154,500. This is the value of the equity that we have in this property after 22 and a half years. I know you're going to say, 22 and a half years is a long time, but it's just to give you an appreciation for how equity builds over time. And also the advantage of why it's great, as a great investment that you can pass on to your children, to your descendant, to get them started. All right, let's put it all together. First thing that you want to do is you want to set the goals. When you're going through and analyzing deal and looking for properties, you want to know what you're looking for. Am I looking for passive income? Am I looking to build equity? Am I looking to add value? To do a fix and flip so I can build up my cash so that I can invest more. So you have to figure out what your goals are, right? So it's either buy and hold, buy for passive income. It's either to flip, or if it's just for equity play, then it's something else that you can do, right? But you have to understand what the goals are. I also want to point out that if you look at the description of the video, there's going to be a link for you to download my app. You can also look at the Apple Store, search the Apple Store and the Google Play Store and search for Flip System. And then you'll be able to find my application here, Flip System. And then look for my application here. And it's a free application. You just need to register, and then you'll be able to, it's providing you a lot more calculations there, in-depth calculations. But so you set your goals first, then you find a property to analyze. So that's something very important. So again, of course, if you're looking to flip a house, you're going to look for a property that needs a lot of renovations. If you're looking for something that's more turnkey, then at that point you're going to look for properties that's recently renovated, that has a tenant in place, etc. So this is something that's also very important once you find out what the goals are. Then you gather some information about the property. What's the price of the property? What's the rent? Look at the expenses as well that you can expect. Anything around like property taxes, etc. And figure out what the expenses would be for that particular property. Once you have that, the first thing that I do is really the gross rent yield. So the 1% rule is kind of like the first focus. This is great because you can look at hundreds of properties, like literally within a second, okay, this one is like is 0.5, this one is 0.7, this one is close to 1. So it's very easy to kind of flag some properties that say, okay, well, this one is a little bit more interesting than the other. Once you have that, Then you start looking at the net cash flow. You can start calculating the net cash flow. And then based on that, you would calculate the cap rate. So I'm looking for cash flow around 200 or more, at least 200, but 200 to 400 in net cash flow. But as we talked about, that net cash flow is not all about it. I want to know what is the cap rate based on the price of the property. So I'm going to look at my net operating income. I'm going to look at the price of the property and calculate the cap rate to see if it's around, I'm looking around normally around the 8%, 7 to 10% cap rate. That's kind of where I'm looking at. And finally, you're going to look at your cash on cash return. You're going to look at your net cash flow, and then you're going to look at your the cash that you have to invest in that property after the financing. And this is how you're going to figure out kind of like what is your return on the cash that you invested in there. These calculations are pretty easy to do, so you can look at that pretty quickly. But the first one really is the gross rental yield. Then you figure out the cash flow and the cap rate are also pretty easy. And then the cash on cash return comes after that. You can see that we go into more and more details and add a few more numbers as we go through. Then, depending on what I'm doing, if I'm doing a flip, for example, or if I'm trying to buy properties that have, that are at a discount, then I would try to figure out, I would calculate obviously the discount value. What is the discount value that I'm looking for these deals? But if I'm doing flips, then I would look at the value add. I would look at how much money do I have to invest? How would I finance the deal? Am I going to pay for the repairs myself? And then I have to put the down payment as well. And then, so I would look at that. This is kind of like the cash that I would need to invest in here. And then I would try to figure out how much equity I can build in this property. And then I would look at how would I resell it and what would be my return on that investment. So that's the other thing, is to create equity snapshot. Even if you do something that's called a BRRRR strategy, this is also another one too. And if you look at the refinancing aspect of that, understanding kind of how much value you can add to a property is something that is very important. So this is how you put all these things together, how to use these metrics to identify the deal and make sure that you're looking at the right deal. It gives you a good sense also of how these numbers work together. And then you can go a little bit deeper into the analysis and really figure out the details. And for that, I recommend my application at flipsystem.com. You can download it. Again, it's free. You can simply register and use the application. You don't need anything else to analyze deals. Now, if you signed up for the Flip System app, either on your phone or on the website, if you have registered for the Flip System application, you would be here. And then we have something that's called a property marketplace, where we have a number of properties in all kinds of different markets. And when you go to Flip System, really your goals is slightly different. In this particular case, you might be willing to flip turnkey single family rentals, or you may be looking to buy and hold a property, a rental property, or you want to do a BRRRR, or maybe you want to do a retail flip. But really, it's a little bit more active than the turnkey rental route. And once you look at that, you can, so you set your goals and you find some properties. You go in the property marketplace and you start looking at some of the properties here. So you would look at the purchase price, you would look at all kinds of things. And right now I'm just looking at the ARV and the purchase price here. And maybe I want to have something where the purchase price is maximum $80,000. It's there, $100,000. And then, there we go. And then now I'm looking for properties that have, that's more like a turnkey flip here. See, there's a flag here for a turnkey flip. I buy for 85 and I can sell it for 120, or this one turnkey flip. So let's look at this property. You can expand that. You can look at some pictures here, see what the neighborhood looks like in the interior and all that. Now, again, I'm going to create an income snapshot for this property. So I want to go and do the gross rental yield. But I don't want to do it for myself because I'm not going to be the one that's going to be buying this property. It's going to be somebody else that's going to buy the turnkey rental. So I want to look at the rent. So $925 per month divided by the price of the property that I want to that I'm planning to sell at, which is the ARV here, the after repair value. So you can see here that it's significantly lower than a 1% rule. And you can also see that it's not the net cash flow for that particular person is not really working. So we look at another property here. This one, $256 in net cash flow. That looks a lot better. The rent is $1,600. So $1,600 divided by 1,650. You can see that it's close to the 1% rule, right? 1,600 divided by 160. And you can see also that it's cash flowing. See, less than 1% here, around the 1% rule, and you can see that it's cash flowing. So this is the first one, gross rental yield. That's the first one I'm going to look at. And then I'm going to look at the net cash flow. We have this value already. Then we have the cap rate. In this one, we don't actually have the cap rate. We can look at that. I don't have the net operating income in here. So we'll have to kind of look at it differently. But then at least I have some sense here with the net cash flow and the gross rental yield that I'm in the right ballpark. I would have to buy this property at $67,000, put like $70,000 in repair, and then flip it at 165, and I can see that it makes sense for the buyer of that property. They're going to be making a cash-on-cash return of 8%. So remember, the cash-on-cash return is the net cash flow that they're going to be making. That includes the financing cost divided by the price of the property, which is $165,000. So we can already tell that this is a pretty decent property. We buy this property at $67,000. We have to put $70,000 in repair cost, sell it at $165,000, and then end up with a profit of $22,000 at that point. The buyer of the property, they're going to be able to rent it at $1,600, do a net cash flow of $256,000, and their cash-on-cash return is going to be $256,000 times 12 divided by the cash they have invested. So obviously this is just a snapshot. I don't have all the information here. So this is why, if you have the flip system, you can just add this property to your property list, and you can go in here, and then you have the property and address here under analysis, the one that's new, and then you can look at the details here, 165, 67 and a half, and you have a ton more details about this property. You can see that from as a flip, when I do the fix and flip, my profit here is going to be, I have to kind of adjust some numbers here, but the profit is going to be $13,000. My return on investment, the cash that I'm going to have invested, the cash I need at closing, if I'm assuming that I'm going to get a hard money loan. This is the hard money loan here, the interest rate and all that. The turnkey flip, this is for the buyer's point of view. What does it look like to them? So they're going to get the rent $1,600. The total cost for the taxes, the insurance, annual insurance, let's say this $1,200. And then the property management, and then the debt service. This is the mortgage payment, the financing cost. This is your net cash flow, the cash on cash return, cash in deal. And the cap rate is here, so 8%. Again, I'm looking between 7 and 10% in terms of cap rate. So that looks very good. It's right within my target, the 8% cash on cash return for the buyer. And so that's also very good. And then if I'm looking at the value add that I'm doing, well, I'm adding about, at 165, I start at $67,000 in the purchase price. I add $70,000, so I'm at $137,000, right? $137,000 in terms of cost for the property, and I'm adding value to 165. And that's once you put all the holding costs together, I make a profit of $13,000 doing this particular deal. So This is how you can quickly look at the numbers associated with a deal and decide then to say, okay, well, I want to buy this property. And then you would go and connect with your team on the ground, your contractor, your realtor, and say, hey, buy me this deal. I want to move forward with it. So I hope you found this helpful, this walkthrough with different property. You can do the same with Redfin. It's just that it's not as focused when you're looking for particular properties to fix and flip, or properties that are rental properties. So that's why I present you with the flip system and the Martel turnkey websites. There are other websites that you can look at as well. Redfin, Zillow, they also have these properties. It's just a little bit easier for me to find these deals on my two systems, my two applications. Again, feel free to download the free Flip System app. It's on the mobile as well on the web. It's if you have an iPhone or any kind of phone, you can download any kind of smartphone. You can download the application and you can start using it. It's absolutely free, and you can also enter your own deal. So I don't have to go into the property marketplace here. I can just go and add a property myself and enter the information directly. So if you're part of the Flip System community, then you can also have access to additional features here, like send to your agent, send to your coach, but you don't need that to get started. Just get yourself familiarized with the metrics associated with income and equity as it relates to rental property. All right, let's go through an example here. I set my goals. My goals are to build passive income. I want to buy turnkey rental properties. I don't want to have to do any kind of renovations, and I want to pay, I want to look at turnkey rentals, right? Something that was recently renovated, has a tenant in place, and it's cash flowing from day one. So I could look at a site like Martel Turnkey, and then kind of go look at one of the deals here, and then go through, gather the information. The nice thing about this is that the information is already there, right? So I gathered the information around the price, around the rent. I don't exactly have the expenses here, but I can see that I have some information right here. So the first thing that I would do is I would look at the gross rent yield, right? Like we discussed. So the gross rent yield would be the current rent, 1,100 divided by 105, multiplied by 100. And I can tell right away that it's above 1, right? Because if it was 1%, that means that this purchase price would be 110. So I can tell that it's the gross rent yield is slightly above 1%, right? So roughly, so I have a pretty good idea that, this is so it looks pretty good. Next thing I want to look at is the net cash flow. Net cash flow is right here, right? And it gives me some assumptions. So $269 a month. I'm looking for between $200 and $400 in terms of net cash flow. So that looks pretty decent. And I'm showing the assumption here. So 20% down with loan at 2%, 7% interest for 30 years. So that's kind of what we have here. So this is the 269. Remember that this net cash flow is the net operating income minus the financing costs, right? So it includes the mortgage payment in there. Then the next one that I'm looking at is a cap rate. Cap rate, I'm looking between actually 7 and 10. So this is the 9% cap rate. So that looks very good. Again, the cap rate is something that, if I want to compare with other properties, I want to know how this property is performing without including the financing costs. This is how I would look at it. I could look at other properties and other investment types that don't have financing and say, well, this is performing at 9%. I can compare that with bonds and say, well, bonds at 3% or 4%. Well, it is it's not as good as this. And on top of that, with rental properties, you have a lot of tax benefits associated with that. So cap rate 9%, and my target is between 7 and 10. So I think we're good here. And finally, the cash on cash return. So the cash on cash return that's calculated here is really the total return. So it's looking, as you can see in the notes here, it says it's looking at the equity build up as well. So it's looking at the cash on cash return, which is the net cash flow at 269 times 12, right? So you'd multiply that. Plus, you would have the appreciation as well, the equity buildup at 3% appreciation. 3% of $100,000, that'd be $3,000. And then you would have the mortgage pay down as well, which is going to be, I normally divide 105 divided by 30 to give me an idea, and that'd be around $3,000 as well. So it's really $9,000 in return in equity appreciation and cash flow divided by my cash invested. And it's telling me how much I need here. I need $3,000 for closing costs, and I need the down payment, 20% down payment, 20% of 105. So I need to have 25,680, and that's how you come up with the 36% cash total return, total cash on cash return. So we already know that this property is going to be adding value at 3% every year, so $3,000, etc. in compounding. So we know it's going to be appreciating at that. So we know that's going to be a good property. We know we're going to have equity pay down on the property, and it's basically included in this cash on cash return. So we have that in there already. So this is how you would look at a property like this on a site like Martel Turnkey, and you can look for turnkey single family rentals on Google to find other companies that offer this kind of service. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you also check out my full real estate investment course in my YouTube channel. As you know, I'm here to help you achieve financial freedom, reach a working optional lifestyle, and this is something that you want to make sure you like and subscribe, and see you next time.